Picture a human around 200,000 years ago. Not a warrior, not a hunter, not a toolmaker, just a person, standing somewhere in East Africa, trying to find food, trying to avoid becoming food. Now imagine placing a photograph of that person next to the faces of the 8 billion people alive today. One thing would immediately stand out. That original human almost certainly had dark skin. So where did everything else come from? Because today, human skin spans one of the widest ranges of any physical trait in our species, from the deepest complexions near the equator to the palest at the poles, and every imaginable shade in between. The story of how that happened is not a story about race. It is not a story about culture or history or politics. It is a story about sunlight and a single molecule. And it contains a detail so surprising that most people have never heard it. Stay with us, because the ending of this story changes how you see every face you will ever look at. It is worth pausing here to understand where all of this began. The first modern humans did not spread across the globe immediately. For the vast majority of our species' existence, roughly 90% of human history, everyone lived in Africa. And Africa has sunlight in quantities that most people living in northern climates simply cannot imagine. Not the kind of sunlight you want to lie in on a beach and work on your tan. The kind of sunlight that looks pleasant for about 20 minutes and then quietly begins destroying your DNA if you are exposed to it constantly over thousands of generations. This is the environment that shaped the human body for most of its existence. So what was the body's solution to this relentless solar assault? Meet melanin. Melanin is the pigment that gives skin its darker color. And if evolution ever filed a patent, melanin would be one of its proudest inventions. Because melanin is essentially nature's own sunscreen, built into your skin, completely waterproof, never runs out mid-holiday. And unlike the bottle you forgot to pack, it was already there when you needed it. Melanin absorbs ultraviolet radiation before it can penetrate the deeper layers of skin and cause damage. The more UV radiation in your environment, the more melanin your body produces. And here is the first thing that surprises most people. Every human being on Earth has roughly the same number of melanocyte cells, the cells that produce melanin. The difference between the darkest and lightest complexions is not the number of these cells. It is how active they are, how much melanin they produce, and how that melanin is distributed within the layers of the skin. And in Africa, where the sun was relentless and unforgiving, melanin was not just useful. It was a massive evolutionary advantage. Think about it this way. Two people, same continent, same sun beating down on them every single day. One produces more melanin, one produces less. The one with more melanin has better DNA protection, better folate levels, better outcomes in pregnancy, healthier children. The one with less melanin? Not so lucky. Generation after generation, thousands of years, the pattern repeats. And slowly, quietly, without any grand plan or committee meeting, dark skin became the biological norm for our species. Not because evolution has a preference for how anyone looks. Evolution does not care about appearances in the slightest. It does not sit back and think, yes, that is a nice complexion. Evolution cares about exactly one thing. Did you survive long enough to have children? That is the entire performance review. Full stop. And for hundreds of thousands of years in Africa, dark skin passed that review. Every single time. But then something happened that changed everything. Humans started moving. And when humans move, the sun moves with them. Or more accurately, the sun stays exactly where it is. And that is the problem. Around 60,000 to 80,000 years ago, groups of humans began leaving Africa. Some moved north into the Middle East. Some pushed into Europe. Others traveled eastward into Asia. Eventually humans would reach Siberia, Australia, and somehow decide that crossing into the Americas was a perfectly reasonable idea. None of them had maps. They were simply following food, following water, following survival, one step at a time. And as they moved further and further from the equator, the sun changed. At higher latitudes, UV radiation is weaker, more diffuse, seasonal rather than constant. In northern Europe in winter, there is almost no meaningful UV radiation for months at a time. At first, this sounds like great news. Less sun damage, less risk. Problem solved. Except not quite. Because the same sunlight that can destroy your DNA also does something the human body absolutely cannot survive without. It triggers the production of vitamin D. Vitamin D is not a minor nutrient. It is critical for bone development, immune function, calcium absorption, and dozens of other essential biological processes. Severe deficiency causes rickets, a disease that deforms developing bones so severely it was a leading cause of childhood death in pre-industrial populations. And here is the problem those northward migrating humans were facing. Melanin, the same molecule that had protected their ancestors so effectively in Africa, was now blocking the limited UV available in their new environment, blocking the sunlight needed to produce vitamin D. Too much melanin near the equator means sun damage. Too much melanin near the poles means vitamin D deficiency. The same molecule that was a survival advantage in one environment had become a liability in another. Now here is where melanin's reputation takes a serious hit. The same molecule that was essentially a superhero in Africa, blocking UV, protecting DNA, keeping everyone alive, suddenly found itself in Siberia, in winter, with almost no sunlight to block, and a population desperately trying to produce vitamin D through skin that was doing its absolute best to stop that from happening. Melanin in Siberia was not a superhero anymore. It was that one friend who shows up overdressed to every occasion. Useful somewhere, deeply inconvenient here. And evolution noticed. Because here is the thing about evolution that most people forget. Evolution does not reward surviving. It rewards thriving. Thriving means stronger bones, better immune systems, healthier pregnancies, and children who live long enough to have their own children. And in a low UV environment, less melanin meant more vitamin D meant more thriving. So slowly, quietly, generation by generation, the populations that moved away from the equator began to change. The individuals who happened to produce slightly less melanin absorb slightly more of the limited UV available, produce slightly more vitamin D, had slightly stronger bones, slightly better outcomes, and passed those traits to their children, who passed them to their children, until lighter skin became the new norm. Not because it was better in any absolute sense, because it was better for that specific place, under that specific sun. And this did not happen overnight. We are talking about an evolutionary process that unfolded over enormous stretches of time. Thousands upon thousands of years of natural selection quietly doing its work, one generation at a time. Just the slow, invisible hand of survival nudging populations in the direction that worked best for their environment. And the first humans who entered Europe were probably still fairly dark-skinned. Modern Europeans did not immediately appear the moment humans crossed into the continent. Ancient DNA has completely transformed our understanding of this. Some hunter-gatherers living in Europe thousands of years ago appear to have a dark skin paired with blue eyes, which sounds like evolution accidentally hit randomize on a character creation screen. But that is what the evidence actually suggests. The pale complexions commonly associated with Europe today became widespread much later, as farming spread, as diets changed, as populations mixed. That is evolution in a nutshell. No master plan. No preference. Just adaptation. Now here is the detail that most people never hear. The shift to lighter skin in European populations did not happen in the deep prehistoric past. Genetic research has shown it occurred largely within the last 8,000 to 10,000 years, which is recent, shockingly recent in evolutionary terms. And one of the key drivers was something nobody expected: agriculture. When humans began farming around 12,000 years ago, diets changed completely. Hunter-gatherers ate diverse foods including animal products naturally rich in vitamin D. Early farmers shifted to grain-dominated diets. Grain contains almost no vitamin D. As farming populations across Europe lost their dietary source of vitamin D, they became entirely dependent on skin-based UV production, which intensified the selection pressure for lighter skin even further. Agriculture did not just change what humans ate, it changed what humans looked like. Now here is where the story becomes even more fascinating. Because Europe was not the only place grappling with the low UV problem. East Asian populations also developed lighter skin than their African ancestors. But the specific genetic changes responsible are largely different. Different genes, different mutations, similar results. two separate evolutionary experiments running simultaneously on opposite sides of the planet, both responding to similar environmental pressures, both arriving at similar outcomes through completely different biological routes. Scientists call this convergent evolution, and nature is surprisingly creative when it comes to solving problems. Sometimes almost suspiciously creative, like it is genuinely showing off. And here is where popular discussions about skin color tend to fall apart completely. People tend to imagine human pigmentation in three neat categories: black, white, Asian. Simple, clean, easy to remember. Also completely wrong. As humans spread across the planet, every local environment created different selective pressures with different UV levels and seasonal variation. Some populations mixed repeatedly over thousands of years. The result was not three colors. It was hundreds, maybe thousands. A gradual, continuous spectrum stretching across every continent. North Africans developed different pigmentation patterns than West Africans. Middle Eastern populations developed different patterns than Europeans. South Asians developed different patterns than East Asians. Indigenous Australians followed their own evolutionary path entirely. Native Americans inherited traits from populations that had migrated through Asia long before written history existed. Humanity did not divide into a few neat boxes. It diversified continuously, messily, unpredictably. Exactly the way evolution tends to do everything. Here is something that tends to stop people cold when they really think about it. The differences we see between human populations today are extraordinarily new. For the vast majority of our species' existence, humans looked far more alike than they do now. The features that feel so significant in the modern world represent the final chapter of a very long book. A handful of pages at the end, written in the last few thousand years. And underneath everything visible, the genes tell the same story. All modern humans are far more genetically alike than our surface differences suggest. The person standing in East Africa 200,000 years ago had no concept of the world that would eventually emerge from their existence. No way of knowing that their descendants would one day cross oceans, build cities that scrape the sky, and invent devices that let people argue with complete strangers on the other side of the planet about topics neither of them fully understands. They were simply alive, simply surviving. And yet, everything that came after was already inside them. Every nation, every language, every tradition, every skin tone looking back from every mirror on Earth today. The remarkable thing about human pigmentation is not the variation itself. It is how logical that variation is once you understand it. A fraction more UV here, a fraction less there. Centuries pass. Populations shift. Genes respond. And the same species quietly paints itself in new shades, not by becoming something different, but simply by adapting to wherever it ended up. One family, countless environments, one story. So here is the genuinely strange part. Of all the things humans could have chosen to judge each other by, we picked melanin, a pigment, produced by a cell, in response to sunlight. We looked at a molecule whose entire job is to manage UV radiation, something that is literally just doing its job based on where your ancestors happen to live, and decided that was a meaningful way to divide humanity. Not intelligence, not kindness, not how good someone is at remembering birthdays. Melanin. Evolution spent 200,000 years carefully calibrating skin color to match different UV environments around the planet. It was a masterpiece of biological engineering. And then humans looked at it and said, yes, this seems like a reasonable basis for a social hierarchy. Evolution did not see that coming. To be fair, evolution does not see anything coming. That is rather the point. But if it could, it would probably be confused. Because from a purely biological standpoint, the differences in human skin color are about as significant as the differences in how much someone tans on holiday. It is the same mechanism, just running for a much longer time, over many more generations, in very different places. The next time you look at the full range of human skin color, you are looking at a living map of where our species has been. A 200,000-year record of migration, adaptation, and survival, written not in stone or in language, in melanin, calibrated by sunlight. One species, one origin, one African beginning. Everything else is what happened when we started walking. If this video changed how you see the human species, hit the like button. Share it with someone who has never heard this story told this way. Subscribe to Better Instincts.